Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. There's been an offer from Ukrainian officials to negotiate without any conditions for the evacuation of civilians and military personnel from Mariupol amid growing fears the city will fall to the Russians. A Ukrainian commander defending Mariupol has made a desperate plea for help, while one powerful Russian said Moscow could seize the city by lunchtime on Thursday. Laurie Callas has more details.
In war, a declaration of optimism by any side should be treated with some scepticism. But the Chechen leader's view that Mariupol will be taken sooner rather than later might quietly be shared by Ukraine. Despite their refusal to surrender, a military commander's plea for help yesterday gave real insight into the difficulty faced by those sheltering at the Azovstal steel plant. And Ukraine's uncharacteristic negotiation offer could be a sign of recognition that the opportunity to save Ukrainian lives there is becoming increasingly limited.
The French President Emmanuel Macron and his far-right challenger Marine Le Pen have clashed over sanctions on Russia in the campaign's only televised debate. Mr. Macron, who's leading in the polls ahead of Sunday's runoff, accused Ms. Le Pen of being financially dependent on Moscow. Mr. Macron also attacked her for recognizing the Russian annexation of Crimea.
Vous avez été, je pense, l'une des premières responsables politiques européennes.
You were, I think, one of the first European politicians in 2014 to recognise the result of the annexation of Crimea. I say this very seriously this evening because this is bad news for our country, because you depend on Russian power and you depend on Mr. Putin.
Mr. Macron also warned that her plan to ban the Islamic headscarf in all public places risked civil war. The U.S. government is appealing a Florida judge's ruling that face masks no longer need to be worn while using public transport, but the Centers for Disease Control said the measure was still needed. Here's Peter Bowes.
The mandate requiring masks to be worn on planes, buses, trains, subway systems and other forms of transport was lifted earlier this week. A judge in Florida said the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention overstepped its legal authority when it introduced the rule 14 months ago. The major airlines responded by telling passengers the wearing of masks was now optional. But the CDC says it believes it acted within the law and that the mandate is still necessary. The Justice Department said earlier it would launch an appeal if requested by health officials.
A court in South Carolina in the United States has ordered a delay to the planned execution of a man by firing squad next week. His lawyers are challenging both his sentence and the method of execution, which they say is unconstitutional. World News from the BBC. The Prime Minister of Peru has said his government will declare a state of emergency as a gathering wave of protests shuts down some of the country's biggest copper mines. 20% of output has been suspended in the world's second biggest copper producer. Indigenous communities in the Andes are angry that they're receiving little additional benefit from the mines. Legislators in Nicaragua have shut down 25 non-governmental organizations which have been critical of President Daniel Ortega's administration. Congress voted by an overwhelming majority to ban the groups, which include a Human Rights Commission documenting the repression of popular protests. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he fully intends to lead his Conservative Party into the next general election, despite calls for him to resign. His remarks follow an attempt by his government to delay a vote scheduled for Thursday on whether the Prime Minister should face a parliamentary investigation over claims he misled MPs. Nick Watt reports.
Boris Johnson's been really bullish on a flight to India where he's on a trade mission, talking about he can't think of the circumstances in which he might resign. He was asked, would you put yourself forward for a confidence vote? And he said there are much more important things to think about. And on Partygate, he said that people aren't interested in talking about politicians. They want to talk about substance. And then he went on to say that he will be fighting the next election as Prime Minister.
The largest ever global study of protected areas in nature has found that most do not actively benefit wildlife. Scientists found that designated nature reserves and areas of outstanding beauty are failing to protect animal populations. The findings suggest that focus should now move to the effectiveness of these areas. That's the latest BBC World News.